Hi, this is Rich Gerard, host of Gerard at Large in the Morning. You're listening to GrokTALK.
GrokTALK.
Welcome back to GrokTALK. My name is Steve McDonald. I am here with Skip Murphy and Mike Rogers, coming to you as we always do, live and later podcast from Concord, New Hampshire at the CNHT studios. I'd like to remind you to check out cnht.org and please visit graniterock.com. Make donations to support both of us as we use that money to keep this program well equipped, or at least adequately equipped, wouldn't you say?
Because you have a new piece of software now.
I do. I'm using
thanks
new
to
software.
Donations.
Thank you very much. And you're listening to the byproduct of that software. We are also on Facebook and Twitter. Just search Granite Rock. Check us out. We send all kinds of neat things that direction and give you an opportunity to find things that interest you. You can also sign up for the Daily Grok at graniterock.com and get all of the links from the previous day emailed to your inbox, and then you can sort and pick and choose the things you love to read about.
And we're even on LinkedIn occasionally when I post something up there.
Okay. See, I didn't know that. That would be Mike's account, though, I suspect.
That is Mike's account.
That would be Mike Rogers. All right, let's get to our next guest. Leighton Stewart is the head of an organization called PlantsNeedCO2.org, whose mission is to educate the public about the positive effects of atmospheric CO2. Leighton, welcome to the program. How are you?
Hey, fine, Steve. Happy to be here.
Okay, great to have you on. So let's talk about CO2, shall we? This is a great subject. Let me put the website up here because I have a link to it. And your mission, of course, is to help educate people about the misleading statements that have been made by a lot of people who talk about global warming and carbon dioxide. Why don't you just give us a brief overview of what you guys are up to?
Well, part of my education is trying to tell the true environmentalists out there, many I hope of whom are listening this morning, that they've been grossly misled on this issue. CO2 is totally beneficial for the plant and animal kingdom. There's no question about that, because we can go back and look at thousands of studies that have been run by the world's agricultural community that prove what happens when we add more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. We all learned in the third grade that carbon dioxide is what plants eat. And we've been putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now for the last 150 years, and you know what? Earth is responding. Mother Nature is taking this experiment that we inadvertently placed there when we had the Industrial Revolution, started putting CO2 in the atmosphere, and we know now Earth is getting greener and greener and greener despite all the negative things we've done to it, and we've done plenty of negative things to the Earth, but a satellite that's been up since 1979 and collecting data on one of its sensors was figured out about a year and a half ago by one of the current NASA scientists that said, you know, this sensor can measure the greenness of the entire globe. And that satellite that is a polar orbiting satellite and measures the entire globe about every 10 or 12 days is showing that for the last 3 decades, Earth has been getting greener and greener and greener still. And so
more crops,
this
more
is just living proof that what we are doing in putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is absolutely wonderful for the habitats and ecosystems, because the forests are getting denser, the grasslands are expanding, despite us paving everything with asphalt, concrete, putting buildings everywhere, and even clear-cutting some of the rainforest. So Mother Nature is talking. We just need to be listening. She's saying, hey, you're helping me green the earth.
This is Skip Murphy, and I want to say thank you for coming on the show as well. You know, I want to make the point that I don't think is made too often, that certainly with the advent of Earth Day back in the early 1970s, where we literally had rivers here in the U.S. catching fire because of pollution and things like that, people thought, well, the Earth is coming to an end, but people don't have a very long sense of history. And I remember back here in New Hampshire, back here in New England, where the forests were almost deforested simply because they were trying to build so many ships, especially when the whaling industry was a big deal here in New England. And yet you look here in New Hampshire, and the forests are almost more dense now than at any time since the colonial period. Conservatism says we need to keep things clean, we need to keep things such that we can continue to grow, where it seems that the environmentalist movement is we should go back to living in caves and sitting around a fire. If I could just do a little take it to the absurd end here.
Oh no!
But
sit in caves and not have a fire.
Yeah. But, you make some good points. There are a lot of good things pointing out. And the IPCC report just came out. That's the intergovernmental document by the UN, who is still saying we need to go socialist because we need to put government control so that we don't go over the 2 degrees. There's also a non-IPCC group as well that's saying the same thing you are. It's like, there are good things happening. And all the good stuff seems to get ignored, and you must find that to be a real big problem where everybody forgets the positive stuff.
That's absolutely correct. And what we have in the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's really a political organization rather than a scientific organization. There are 192 countries represented in the United Nations IPCC. And 172 of the 192 are undeveloped countries that would be receiving millions and millions of dollars per year from the 20 developed countries because we've been polluting their atmosphere with carbon dioxide since the Industrial Revolution 150 years ago. And by golly, we need to pay them money every year because of the bad thing we have done for them. You know what we've done for them? We have put this CO2 best atmospheric fertilizer in their atmosphere and made their food crops grow better than they would have otherwise. And that's what we're seeing now from the satellite data, that Earth is greening. And over 5,000 studies by the Earth's agricultural community that show how much more food crops, plants, trees grow with more CO2. So you need to tell me, because I don't see any common sense in us having to pay countries for having made their food crops grow more. It just doesn't make any sense.
Do you have any averages? I know that a lot of lands that were arid have grown green, that they're expanding farming land. Do we have a rough estimate of the percentages?
Well, they say that looking at the satellite data, they say that 20% of the Earth, where we're looking at farmlands and forests and things like that, are getting greener and greener, obviously, very obviously. And then there's a lot of it that's kind of neutral. They can't decide whether it's getting greener or not, but net, it clearly is getting greener. Let me tell you what the world's agricultural communities found out with these 5,327 studies. They have found out that the 8 most consumed food crops, barley, rice, wheat, soybeans, white potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, and cassava, they have found out that if we let the carbon dioxide level drift up another 300 parts per million, that those 8 most consumed food crops would increase their growth by 39.3%, almost 40%.
That's fabulous. Isn't it true that during some of the past periods when the Earth was much warmer and the carbon dioxide was actually much higher, that the Earth was as green as it's ever been? It was like jungle all over?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, our coal beds came from a time when Earth was very, very green. Most of the plants on Earth evolved at a time when the CO2 level was much higher than it is today. Up to, 430 million years ago, the CO2 level was 4,400 parts per million, and land plants began to show up on Earth. And as we've come forward, they've been coming in with CO2 levels at 2,000 and 3,000 parts per million. And as we're speaking now, we're only breathing in about 400 parts per million, not 4,000 or 2,000 or whatever. And so I think the plants are responding to this additional CO2 because their metabolism may have been set way back when they first showed up on Earth and were able to get a grip on the otherwise barren land that they took over.
Sure.
So all of this evidence is out there. What is scaring everybody to death, because, look, I mean, everybody can understand pretty easily that CO2 makes plants grow, because, like I say, we all learned that in the third grade. But climate science is extremely complex. It's difficult for people to get their arms around it. So it's easy for me to go in and show data to a lot of people that are otherwise alarmist and warmist, I would call them. They can understand the benefit of CO2, but they say, oh, but it is going to cause catastrophic warming. Well, where are those forecasts coming from? They are coming from the output of unvalidated, and let me stress, unvalidated computer models. And usually what the press picks up on, because as we all know, as we sit here and talk, the media loves catastrophes because the human race seems to like to line up in front of the TV set or around the radio and listen to catastrophes as they unfold or as they're predicted. And that's where we are today. You have these extreme forecasts, they call them scenarios, I guess, that come out of these unvalidated computer models. The press picks them up and runs with them, and all you hear about is the model that gave the most extreme warming possibility. So when you look at the real data, the empirical data of what has happened to Earth's temperature and CO2 relationship over the last 16 years now, when CO2 levels still going up rapidly and the Earth hasn't warmed at all. Look at the last century, when from 1910 to 1945, the Earth's temperature rose just as rapidly as it did in the 80s and 90s, yet the CO2 level was hardly changing at all at that time. And then go back the last 10,000 years, the last 10 million years, the last 542 million years, and you do not see the footprint that carbon dioxide is driving Earth's climate. The cores that they've taken in Greenland and in Antarctica show that the temperature changes first, and then about 800 years later, the CO2 levels change.
So
what
what
cause sure doesn't follow an effect.
So that's an interesting data point you just quoted there, Leighton. This is Mike. You had said that CO2 tends to follow temperature, and I was aware of that. That 800 years is really interesting because what it means is that the rising trend right now could in fact be the follow-on from the medieval warm period when in fact plant life of all sorts was growing like crazy. And the other thing, of course, as you say, one of our warmest and most arid periods was around 1930, and things have eased back a little since then. Let me just ask one devil's advocate question, though.
Good.
Is there a point at which, not for climate reasons, because CO2 is a minor driver of temperature compared to methane, water vapor, etc., which are regulatory effects, but is there a point at which carbon dioxide becomes harmful to mammals and humans as opposed to good for plants?
Excellent question. Let me give you some statistics on that. We're breathing 400 parts per million today. In the United States nuclear submarines, they allow that level to build up to 8,400 compared to 8,000 parts per million while those sailors are underneath the water on these nuclear subs for up to 90 days at a time. For NASA, if and when they send somebody to Mars, they've said that in those capsules that these astronauts will be in for up to 3 years on that journey there and back. They will allow the CO2 level to be 5,000 parts per million for 3 years.
Wow.
So even the United States government's own statistics and what they're putting out demonstrates very quickly that carbon dioxide is not toxic to man. There are not enough fossil fuels of oil, gas, and coal if we burned every one that we could find in the ground to raise the CO2 levels to 2 or 3 or 5,000 parts per million. There's not enough of it left in the ground. So this is just a lot of scare tactics that are coming from about 6 different groups that are either making money off of this or making promotions off of this, or if you're in the administration, and I'm not saying the Obama administration is the only one that likes tax dollars flowing through their fingers, but if they ever got in a cap-and-trade system, not only would the Wall Street brokers make billions of dollars a year, but the government would see all the taxes attached to that, and administrations know how to spend money and buy votes if they've got a big flow of dollars coming through their fingers. So there are a lot of people out there. The one that disappoints me the most is academia, because if you're an assistant professor and want to get promoted to professor, one of the best things you can do is bring in a big government grant into the institution, because the colleges and universities in the United States get ranked a lot on how many research dollars they bring in. In other words, you cannot be a top 25 university in the United States of America without having at least $30 million a year of research funds coming in. And I know that from talking to presidents of a couple of universities that admitted openly, said, oh yeah, these research dollars really do help us get ranked nationally, which of course helps them bring in better students and get in more money and everything like that. So as the old Russian poet Pushkin said, where there is a trough, there will be pigs. And Mr. Gore started the money flowing out of the government trough not to find out what was causing global warming, but what the negative impact was of man-made CO2 on the environment. Now, in the book I wrote, Fire, Ice, and Paradise, I've identified about 18 different things that drive the climate, and since then I've added about 4 more. There are all kinds of things that drive Earth's climate, and Mother Nature's been doing that forever. And all of a sudden we think, by golly, we've gotten here and put a little more CO2 in the atmosphere, a very weak greenhouse gas, and all of a sudden we've wrested control of Earth's atmosphere and climate from Mother Nature. I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't make much sense.
Leighton, we're going to take a quick 60-second break. Stay on the line, and we'll be right back, okay?
Okay,
all right, hang on. All right, we're going to be back in 60 seconds.
This is a coalition of New Hampshire taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now, at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Hi, this is Rich Gerard, host of Gerard at Large in the Morning, the Manchester area's only locally owned, locally operated, focused, and interested, riveting radio show, heard live every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 on 90.7 FM WLMW, New Hampshire Family Radio, and available 24/7 live or archived at GerardAtLarge.com. Be sure to tune in.
All right, we're back with Leighton Stewart from Plants. I already forgot the name. Oh, my Lord. PlantsNeedCO2.org. I have some air coming from somewhere. I have extra air. There we go. Did you hear my laptop beep during the break?
I did.
There it is again. Let's go find out what that is. Where are we? Somebody's pinging me with something. It might be email. It might be anything. Anyway, we're back with Leighton Stewart, who had the line of the day.
He did too. If you have a trough, the pigs will come to it. Well, so Al Gore is a special kind of pig, because whilst he's preaching to us about living with less, of course he has his home that uses 20 times as much energy as any other home in that part of the country. He has his private jet. And most of all, he set up businesses and exchanges to sell indulgences for people who feel guilty about using carbon, and by golly, he's going to make them feel guilty, so they pay. And I thought one of the most hilarious things of the last few years, I think it was Copenhagen, when Mark Morano and Lord Monckton were selling climate change indulgences as a prank at an IPCC meeting.
I was in Copenhagen. I was there with Lord Monckton, he and Fred Singer. In fact, I made my presentations between those two guys.
Two of my heroes.
Yeah, right. And we were talking to the Danish Parliament over there. They asked us to come in and make a presentation because they wanted to hear the other side of this issue themselves. And that's when I found out that there were 192 countries represented on the IPCC, and there were only 20 of them there that were going to have to pay all this money to these other countries because of the bad thing we'd been doing, fertilizing their crops.
Yep. So there you go. There you have it.
This doesn't make any sense. I tell you, the Achilles heel of the warmist alarmists, I'll say, is empirical evidence. They do not have any empirical evidence that says that what's happening on Earth today is unusual, is different, because we can see everything in the past that's occurred over and over and over again when only Mother Nature had control of the climate. And so they just have to run to these computer models, and sure, with some of the things that they input to these real complex models, they don't really know the range of the up or the down or the hot or the cold of some of these things, so they have to make an assumption and put it in there. And if you're looking for a grant, you better make an assumption that, by golly, it's probably CO2, and we need to study that some more and get another grant.
And that's been the interesting thing. This is Skip again. All of us are in high tech and computer engineers and that kind of stuff. I did computer modeling very early on, and we oftentimes will put up graphs that because we watch this area of our lives, and it's highly amusing and scary that we put these graphs up and we see what the actual temperatures are and where they've been trending for the last few decades, and it's very cool to watch that they only go back a couple hundred years to make this claim, if that, 100 years generally. And you see the actual temperatures measured versus their climate models, and you go, gosh, and we're supposed to be spending trillions of dollars and outsourcing our lives to these people who make themselves out to be so knowledgeable, and their models can't even do the Maunder minimum.
They don't.
They just can't. They don't match up.
Verification to make the models validated.
Yeah,
they can't validate them. There's not. The evidence is not there that's in existence to validate these models because, as you say, they were wrong starting in 1988 when James Hansen with NASA there made this big prediction to the United States Senate, which is what got everybody so concerned about catastrophic global warming coming our way. His models were abjectly wrong. They've been proven wrong now. We're a quarter century later than when he made those predictions, and those models were wrong. Now, take today's models, the very most modern models, go back there, put in the same kind of information, and these modern models come out just like Hansen's models. They are inputting improper assumptions into those models because I think they must have a reason for wanting to get the result they get. It is very discouraging. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get empirical evidence in front of people, and so I'd encourage somebody, for one, just for educational background, go and look at some scientific charts and things that plants need CO2, plantsneedco2.org. But look, don't just take my information on it. There's a group of ex-NASA scientists that are not beholden to the administration anymore, and a couple astronauts. There's about 30 of them. They've been studying this intently now for over 2 years, and the group is made up of astrophysicists, geophysicists, geochemists, mechanical, electrical engineers, meteorologists. Most of them are the Apollo bunch that put our people on the moon and brought them back safely. And they know models backwards and forwards, and they say these models aren't worth anything for making projections that we ought to be making policy decisions on and spending the trillions of dollars trying to get CO2 out of the atmosphere that one of you just mentioned a while ago. So, yeah, it's real discouraging. The environmentalist extremist groups are making all of their claims, and for some reason their feet don't get held to the fire when they say something that's absolutely false. But they're just trying to scare the money out of your pocket because that's how they get their money in. They don't get their money in when they keep putting out good news, good news. They get the money in when they scare you to death and you say, man, the earth's going to burn up if you don't send us a contribution. Oh, my. Anyway, go ahead. Give me another question.
Kind of quick because we're almost at the end of the segment here. And then you look at the press, who was supposed to be the ones that would divine truth from fallacy here, and they're all in the tank for the warmists. What do we do?
They are. It's unbelievable. And some of the things that have been shocking, like the poll that the New York Times did, 3 years ago now maybe, and that the Scientific American did, clearly showed that the scientists out there, even the weather people that are on television and the radio every day, when they did a poll of them, they found out that they clearly did not all line up and say the Earth was going to get unusually warm because of man's emissions of CO2.
I got to break in here, Leighton, because we're at the end of the segment. I got a hard break coming up in like 15 or 20 seconds or so. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. The website is plantsneedco2.org. Go check it out. Thanks a lot for helping.
You bet.
I hope you have a great weekend, sir. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
All right, that was it. Next segment is Tony DeMott from Campaign for Liberty, and we'll be right back.
GrokTALK. Turned off or tuned out recently? Can't believe what you see or hear these days? We have the show for you. It's all about taking control through understanding what's happening. Dr. Julianne Cooper, founder and president of Liberty Harbor Academy, hosts Carpe Diem, New Hampshire's first culture and education show on WSMN Radio 1590. Longtime history professor, entrepreneur, and cultural commentator Dr. Cooper will discuss what's happening in and to American culture and education. From pop culture to higher education, Dr. Cooper will help you make sense of the world. So, seize the day. Listen to Carpe Diem with Dr. Cooper every Tuesday from 11 to noon.
Steve McDonald here. Molly Shaheen, Senator Jean Shaheen's daughter, has a very expensive LA apartment where she lives and works, but for some strange reason, she voted here in New Hampshire. Elena Biden, niece to the man a heartbeat away from the presidency, well, she never lived in New Hampshire at all, and she voted here and went back home. Hampshire Democrat Emma Roos invited her adult children to leave their homes in Virginia, Washington, D.C. to claim they lived in New Hampshire to vote last November, and they went back home. New Hampshire State Senator Martha Fuller Clark, vice chair of the New Hampshire Democrat State Party, she had a whole bunch of people who aren't from here living in her home, including a paid congressional staffer and an ACLU lawyer from Arkansas. They don't live here. They all claim to be claiming to live here just so they can vote here and then leave. That's not all the Democrats who showed up to steal your votes and then leave, but that'll get you started. This is Steve McDonald for Granite Rock, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you. GrokTALK is 2 hours of news and opinion you could only get from GraniteRock.com. But don't limit yourself to GrokTALK. Check us out at GraniteRock.com. Follow us on Facebook or Twitter by searching Granite Grok.
Grok TV.